We got so excited. It was the Soundcore Motion Boom Plus. It was hype, hype, hype. And then what happened? Well, it wasn't quite the perfect speaker we was hoping for. Not bad. In fact, for how loud it goes, for the weight and for the price, it's still, it's still probably out on its own for a party speaker. But yes, it's been a little bit harsh. It's got 6 kilohertz peak that they added in firmware. Didn't need to be there. They said they were going to fix it, but then all they did was reduce the mids and the highs relative to the bass. Still saying they're going to fix the 6 kilohertz peak. But then you found out Tribit or Tribit, we really don't know how they say that, have come along and they brought out, oh, it's quite heavy, it's quite heavy, it's quite light, it's quite light, quite heavy, quite heavy. The Tribit Stormbox Blast, 2.4 kilos, 5.5 kilos. There is a big difference in the weight. In fact, that is more than twice the weight of the Motion Boom Plus. So I'm going to give you an overview of the Tribit Stormbox Blast, and we're going to compare it to the Motion Boom Plus and see which one is the bargain boombox killer of the moment, of the day, of the year, of the century. Who knows where it will lead. In terms of price, it seems to be around 160 quid or $200 for the Blast. You're looking at about $190, $180, but they're never going to hold that price. Predicting about 150 quid, probably about 180 quid in the end when they finish, because there's already discounts. In fact, if you've ever heard of Flossie Carter, who's a major channel, he's got a code on his channel where you can get money off on the Tribit. One day, when I'm a huge channel, I'll get my own vanity code, and we'll all make some money. Well, I'll make the money, and you'll get a great speaker. We'll all be happy. But it's not about the money. I haven't even asked for a code for the speaker, just to give you the highlights before we get into the meat of the review. It's a 90 watt speaker. 90! And it's only 80 watts on the Soundcore Motion Boom Plus, but it's 90 watts. So it must be so much. No, because, it says 90 watts. It doesn't say what they're measuring, how they're measuring, or anything at all. It's a number. So there's a number for the Tribit Stormbox Plus, and there's a number for the Soundcore Motion Boom Plus. And what's the number out? So it's the number is 90W, 80W, and that's all we need to know. We're going to test the loudness. What can get very confusing, and how loud it goes actually depends on multiple factors. Let's not get lost in the marketing of these speakers. One major difference between the Blast and the Stormbox, the Motion Boom Plus. I'm going to have lots of trouble with these names because multiple speakers have very similar bits. Obviously, Motion Boom we're used to. Then there's the Motion Plus, Motion Boom Plus Stormbox. Many of their speakers are called either X-Sound or Stormbox. I don't know why. Maybe I should ask. Maybe before you do a review, Al, get your facts straight. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. But it's a Stormbox Blast. Why is it called the Blast? I don't know. Because hopefully it's not going to explode. But maybe it's just because you're going to have such a blast. It sounds a bit corny, but it could well be, when they sat around thinking of the name, that's what they said. Multi-point, you can use 2 different devices to control the speaker at the same time. And the lights on this are interesting, not least because they're left and right, but they work individually. It really does work, first of all, in sync with the music. By the way, it's also a volume indicator. So if I was going down volume, you can see where you are. I want to get the max volume. Did you see that? That was nice. And if you're actually playing music, what does it do? It works in sync. Pick up any song here. And indeed, there is an app. You can go in the app. There are 2 different settings for the lighting control. And you can change from mode 1 to mode 2. In the app, also has EQ. First of all, I should mention, we've got an XBass button. Obviously, that's going to give you extra bass, but we'll see just how much bass in a minute. It comes configured already out of the box with, you can switch in the app between XBass, but of course you can switch on and off with the button there anyway. By the way, you can also turn the mode, change the mode without the app anyway. There is a button there for the changing the lights. It's got a music mode, which is basically XBass off, and an audio book mode, which is horrendous. It's a bass cut, highs cut. Is that really an audio book mode? Not for this channel to be discussing. We've got a multi-function button, which is a 0 HU play pause, volume up, volume down, Bluetooth, power indicator, and on the back, you're going to get very excited because auxiliary input, we got USB-C for using it as a power bank, and it is a mains, it's a mains lead. You've got to carry a mains lead with you. That's not very convenient. That's something to keep in mind in terms of comparing these two speakers. Heavy, need a mains lead, very, very light, but it's a USB-C connection for your charging. If you're on your travels, that can make a big difference. It's a metal grille on the front, but the rest of it is quite plasticky, but hey, it feels solid enough. Other headlines before we get into the specs at the end of the video. In terms of those drivers, we've got two 107mm woofers versus two 90mm woofers on the Boom Plus. We've got two 25mm tweeters on the Boom Plus, two 30mm woofer tweeters on the Tribit Stormbox Blast. Both have two side passive radiators. And what we really want to do is just get an indication. Real tracks, real world, doesn't always work out what the frequency response measurements will tell you. It's an indicator. It's an interesting indicator of what we may find down the line and also potential issues. Let's have a look at the frequency response measurements.
Tribit Stormbox Blast, XBass turned off, XBass turned on. The first thing that obviously jumps right out is massive, huge 5.5 kilohertz dip, quite wide, from about 4 kilohertz to 6 kilohertz. That's a bit of a worry. Outside of that, not too unbalanced. Obviously, XBass on, quite a dip in mids and upper bass between that 100 hertz and about 2 kilohertz. Then we got the bright end with a bit of a push, 7 kilohertz and above. Between off XBass and then XBass on, we still have that bass. It's not a complete bass cut with XBass off. It's just more upper to mid bass oriented compared to XBass on, where it's much more extended. So rolling off about 80 hertz XBass off, rolling off just under 60 hertz XBass on. It does look quite deep, that bass. Overlaying XBass on, XBass off. You can see turning XBass on, it does make it go a tad louder all over, which alone is going to make it sound a bit more bass heavy to your ears. And then 200 hertz and down is a big bass push, peaking around 60 hertz. However, maximum volume, it's actually XBass off that's a tad louder, because XBass on means it's giving up some volume to maintain some of the deeper bass. The difference isn't huge, but it looks like XBass off is a tad louder, but XBass on, even at maximum volume, is giving you almost all of the bass you're getting at lower volumes. If you stick the mains lead in, it goes a fraction louder at all volumes, but once you hit maximum volume, there is a benefit. It's going a tad louder, but you've also got about 1 decibel more in the bass from 200 hertz and down.
So there is a massive issue, but will it be a massive issue when we actually just sit down and listen to this speaker? But there is a 3 to 6 kilohertz dip, and it's a big dip. There's some weird things going on. We could guess at the reason. We'll never really know. But the most common you'd think is something to do with the transition between tweeters and the woofers, or indeed a phase issue. So we've got XBass, and by the way, as you may have seen, you stick the power lead in, it looks like it will go a bit louder and a bit more bass, certainly at maximum volume when you put the power lead in. But let's have a listen to XBass on and XBass off. And it is interesting on this speaker, because normally XBass off is just a bass cut. A tragic bass cut where you're getting no bass at all. I have to say, it's well judged on the Stormbox Blast. If you turn it off, you still get a sense of bass. It's just going deeper when you have XBass on. But let's have a listen. XBass on, XBass off, around, well, at 65% volume.
It's alright, girl, you got me sleepless, begging, barely breathing. My kryptonite, but you feel so right. You know you're my weakness. You know you're my weakness. You know you're my weakness. You got me sleepless.
So it's not just affecting the bass. There is a difference in loudness. It does go a bit louder when you have XBass on outside of the bass. Of course, that's going to help emphasize that something, it's in your face bass and it's going louder. It's a bit more fizzy and buzzy and it's a proper party. But really, it's just going a bit louder. We see that a lot. But there is a big difference in the bass. It's more extended. So it's more upper bass, XBass off, deeper bass, bigger bass, XBass on. But you can certainly, not many of these speakers I can listen to without XBass on because it's simply a bass cut. But on this speaker, it's different. You can listen XBass off if that bass is too much, and you will still get a sense of decent bass. Sometimes I'm listening to this with XBass off. I haven't even realised XBass off because, hey, there's enough bass there to be a satisfying listen. But thing to note about that XBass on, it's louder everywhere when you turn XBass on, and deeper and more extended and louder all over in the bass, except for when you get to near maximum volume, because then it's reducing some of the mids and highs to keep the bass, and that's all credit to Tribit for giving us as much as that bass to maximum volume as they can. And if you have XBass off, it'll go a bit louder just without that bass. Obviously, it's easier to go louder in the mids and highs because it takes less of the amp to drive it. But I'm going to do my comparisons with XBass on because I think that's how most people will listen to it. That's what these speakers are all about. We're buying them not because it's the greatest hi-fi you've ever listened to, but because potentially it's a JBL Boombox killer. We're going to do a low-level listen around 33%, which is when loudness matching is 35% on the Stormbox Blast and 30% on the Motion Boom. By the way, it's in my custom mode. What's the point that you're going one in default mode? I mean, it doesn't matter what I say and how much I explain. That's going to come in the comments. Why is that in default and that's in custom EQ and that tells me absolutely nothing and I'm going back to Oliver's channel. I'm doing that because it is a lot better in custom mode. I have EQ'd it, although I have to tweak it again for the latest firmware. I haven't had time to mess around with the custom EQ, which is in the app. You can change that EQ with the Tribit app, except that it doesn't need it even without having tried it at all. It's already sounding decent to my ears, whereas that needs custom mode to sound decent, and there's no point in doing the head-to-head because it won't tell you the potential of the Soundcore Motion Boom Plus. Why would Soundcore release it? We don't know. They've done some strange things. And just to give you the issues, by the way, before I forget, we already know if the speaker gets hot, the passive radiators start sticking. It is a bit on the harsh side, but it's much better now because they've given us a bit more in the bass, which is kind of smoothing over some of that harshness. It's very much a party speaker. To me, that's not really a musical sounding speaker, but it's going to do the job at that weight for a party. But let's get on 33%, 35%, 30%. Listen.
Looking back, they're in the sand. Those were the best times that we ever had. Memories on replay from all of those days. Do you think about them? Oh, tell me, do you? Oh, feel like I do. Oh, wish that things were different and time didn't go slipping. Oh, tell me, do you feel the same like I do? Feel like I do. Feel like I do. You think about it, you feel the same. Tell me, do you? Oh, feel like I do. Oh, wish that things were different. Time didn't go slipping. Oh, tell me, do you feel the same like I do? Feel like I do. Feel like I do. You think about it, you feel the same. Tell me, do you? Oh, feel like I do. Oh, wish that things were different. Time didn't go slipping. Oh, tell me, do you feel the same like I do?
Low volume listening. The difference between the two speakers is not huge. Probably the biggest difference between them is The dip for the Blast, about 5.5 kilohertz, and the peak on the Motion Boom Plus around the 6 kilohertz mark. Between the dip and the peak, the difference is huge. In terms of the bass, from 55 hertz and down, it's the Stormbox Blast that takes over. And the deeper you go, the bigger the advantage for the Stormbox Blast, but of course, considerably rolled off.
Having balanced the sound via custom EQ or the Motion Boom Plus, they are not dissimilar at these low volumes. They both have issues, and that's probably the biggest difference between them, is the dip, which is dipping down to 5.5 kilohertz versus the 6 kilohertz peak, in almost exact opposites in terms of tuning, and that is the biggest difference at these volumes. Both of them sound decent, but to me, that still sounds like a party speaker, whereas that sounds more musical. I could sit down and listen to that and just listen to the music, whereas with that, I don't forget that I'm listening through a speaker, and that's the difference at these volumes. On the whole, the Boom Plus is a bit more upper bass slanted. We do have deeper bass on the Blast, and that also comes through in a subtle way, deeper sounding bass, more upper bass oriented. In terms of that deep bass, we're 12 decibels up by 40 hertz, albeit rolled off. But the difference in the deep bass, we got the mid and the upper bass, it simply doesn't do deep bass. Whereas look at the size of it, look at the weight, and the difference is huge. It does deep bass. Let's kick it up to real world party volumes, around 70% volume.
Wanna go home, party. Try my best to meet somebody, but everybody around me's falling in love to our song. Yeah, hate it. Taking my shot 'cause I can't take it, but I don't think I make anything that strong. So I hold on. Yeah. I'm so tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that song, tired. Just wanna go home, wanna go home, wanna go home. Oh. So tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that. Just wanna go home, wanna go home, wanna go home. Oh. So tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that song, tired. Just wanna go home, wanna go home, wanna go home. Oh. So tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that song, tired. Just wanna go home, wanna go home, wanna go home. Strangers, killing my lonely nights with strangers. I need to leave, they go back to our song. So I hold on, hurts like lost in the sound. Bus got season, like you're still around. Can't miss you, and I need you now. Yeah. I'm so tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that song, tired. Just wanna go home, wanna go home, wanna go home. Oh. So tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that song, tired. Just wanna go home, wanna go home, wanna go home. Oh. I'm so tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that song, tired. Just wanna go home, wanna go home, wanna go home. Oh. So tired of that song, tired of that song, tired of that song, tired. Just wanna go home, wanna go home, wanna go home.
By the time you hit decent listening volumes, it is a Stormbox Blast that takes over. In terms of the bass, 200 hertz and down, the Stormbox Blast owns the Motion Boom Plus. Quite similar in the mids. The peak around 3 kilohertz, the Stormbox Blast. With the Motion Boom Plus, it has its peak around the 6 kilohertz mark. Trademark dip, 5.5 kilohertz for the Stormbox Blast. And at the high end, into harmonics, it's advantage for Stormbox Blast. In terms of that deep bass, it's a massive 7 decibels advantage to the Stormbox Blast. And so now the signature sounds are quite different because the Stormbox Blast has the bigger bass, while you're going to hear a little bit more of the high end on the Motion Boom Plus.
So now it's quite a different result. There are differences, considerable differences now in the sound between these two speakers, the Motion Boom Plus, the Tribit Stormbox Blast. The Boom Plus now does sound a bit thin. It's a very punchy speaker. This wants to have a fight, I said before, with Mike Tyson. But it actually sounds, it's almost getting lost now at these volumes against the Stormbox Blast, remember, with XBass on, because it's so much deeper and bigger and thicker in the bass. A 3.5 decibel advantage overall, mid, upper, deep bass to the Blast over, you know, something that isn't bass light, just doesn't have deep bass, the Boom Plus. That's a big difference, and quite a difference now from how it was at lower volumes, where this is quite smooth and very listenable. Now, when you pump up that volume, that's when the bass comes alive. It's at that point that you got to worry, are the neighbours going to start banging? There's none of that at lower volumes. It's sort of like the JBL Boombox 2, but maybe even more so. Overall, a smoother, darker sound, clearer, thinner, a bit more hard-edged on the Motion Boom Plus. So, for me, that's a win. For what you're going to buy these speakers for, which is not delicate listening, that's a win for the Stormbox Blast, because not just at that particular volume. For me, the main difference here is that's musical. I'm going through different tracks that I know well because I want to hear what it can do. I don't do that with the Boom Plus because it doesn't sound musical, never quite sounds nice. I don't think it gels. I can't really say, you know, it sounds terrible because of this, that. Just the way it comes together, it doesn't ever make me just want to go through all my favourite tracks. I'm doing that with Stormbox Blast. I think what it does is well judged. Let's see what it does at maximum volume.
Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. That's right. I'll be the predator, I'll hunt the prey, then we can make love every night, every day. It's a jungle out there and life still ain't easy, but we can make like the animals on TV. Cause you and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel.
Maximum volume by a decibel. The Stormbox Blast is louder, but that's due to this big ugly peak now, 2 kilohertz to about 4 kilohertz. It's a big peak, but the Blast does also have the bigger bass, but only from about 85 hertz and down and into the mid-deep bass is the Stormbox Blast winning. The upper bass is still stronger on the Motion Boom Plus. Indeed, the upper bass into the mids is strongest on the Boom Plus. If you turn XBass off, you get a little bit more in terms of loudness at the cost of some deep bass on the Blast. And indeed, if you plug the mains lead in, you'll go about half a decibel louder again on the Stormbox Blast, and you'll get about just under a decibel more in the bass. So the difference isn't massive. There is some advantage to having the mains lead plugged in at maximum volumes.
First of all, let's not forget, if you turn XBass off, it will go a bit louder. You just won't have as much bass. I've left XBass on, but it's louder than the Boom Plus with its custom EQ, because I've balanced it out. But anyway, it would have gone louder in previous firmware. They've reduced mids and highs since previous firmware. However, I actually thought that was a bit closer than I expected. I thought that would go a lot louder. But hey, remember, it's hanging on to that deep bass. That's where it costs in terms of use of the amp. 13 decibels up at 40 hertz. Yes, it's rolled off. Overall deep bass, over 6 decibels up. It's still huge. The difference is huge. However, something that didn't show up my frequency response, but it's doing it in real world tracks. obviously so much dynamic EQ and limiters and things like that going on that you don't really know till you hit real world tracks. However, there's a big reduction now in the, let's say, the harmonic at the very high end, and we're left with a 2 to 4 kilohertz peak. That's actually making it sound a bit screechy, maybe even more screechy than what we called a screech fest, although it's a lot better now than it was, the Boom Plus. There's enough bass still to be satisfying on the Boom Plus, and it's 2 dB up in terms of upper bass, and even though it's upper bass oriented now, because it doesn't have the nasty peak that actually I'm now describing on the Tribit, for some reason, in real world tracks it's doing that. You could have an argument which one is a better listen. However, you've got that peak, but you've also got that deep bass, which makes up for a lot of the issues. But it was different. That was a different result given what happened at around 70%. The maximum volume, I'm not sure what's going on there. The dip at the very high end, and then focusing on this 2 to 4 kilohertz peak is not really working, you know, given the tuning at lower volumes. And actually, you'd have a choice between which one of these sounds best at maximum volume. However, overall, there's only one speaker I'm going to be listening to for normal listening, that's for sure. That's the Soundcore. That's not the Soundcore at all. It's the Tribit or the Tribit Stormbox Blast, but it's not the whole story. If you're traveling, that's heavy. That's a heavy old speaker. More than twice the weight of that, and yet the loudness is not that much different between them. The big difference is you're getting deep bass there, you know, almost JBL Boombox like, that's completely missing on the Boom Plus, which of course does help it go that much louder. But it's still, in terms of party speaker and how loud it goes for the weight and the price, it's doing impressive things. But a lot of people who just like listening to music and it's not about having a party are not really digging this speaker. But a lot of other people who are going partying that just want it to go loud, that just want a beat and just playing in the schoolyard and annoying the teachers, they're loving on that. So it's quite, we'll have to say a Marmite speaker. You can love it or hate it, and everyone will be right. A lot happening here. What's the specs? Let's go over all the specs, see if we miss anything of note. Do you know where they've come from? You'll never believe it. It comes from Switzerland. No, it don't. It comes from China. Now, here's a big difference. I've said it before. Now, I'm getting complaints about battery life on the, amongst other issues, on the Boom Plus. A lot of, overall, not getting the battery life you're expecting. People are saying 50% volume, they're getting about 5 hours. Do you know why? 46.1 watt hour battery is not a good battery. It's not a decent sized battery for how loud it goes and how punchy it is on the Boom Plus. 71.3 watt hours. Yes, it's a bigger speaker. Yes, it's a heavier speaker. That's a proper battery. That's been thought out. 71 watt hours, 46 watt hours. That alone is going to make people think both SBC, both Bluetooth 5.3, both do true wireless stereo pairing. You can also do 100 plus speakers with the Boom Plus. USB-C charging on the Boom Plus, but it's a mains lead. That's going to be a bit awkward for some people. On the Stormbox Blast, both have auxiliary input. Both can be used as a power bank. Only the Boom Plus can be used for phone calls. Only the Stormbox Blast has the lights. Here's a biggie. It floats, but it's so heavy it's going to sink to the bottom. No, do you know what? Not only does this near 6 kilo speaker float, it'll float with the drivers up and you can still listen to it. And that's great. That doesn't happen very often. Yeah, a lot of them will float, but not many with the drivers up. That was I have to keep doing that. That was a shocker to me, and that's really nice. Doesn't float with drivers up, but it does float, and it's also not only waterproof, as they both are, 1 meter water, 30 minutes. It's also dustproof on the Boom Plus. We talked about the drivers in terms of what that means in terms of surface area. A lot more surface area on the drivers for the Stormbox Blast. Both got tweeters, but only the Motion Boom Plus presents to you and me titanium drivers, and it's got a neodymium magnet. Both of these speakers are very good on auxiliary. I can only measure down to plus or minus 17 milliseconds. So they are both within that margin of error. So I'm declaring both have no latency on the auxiliary. Just bear in mind there may be a very small amount of latency that's within the margin of error that I can actually measure. YouTube just scrapes in what I call acceptable. 83 milliseconds just about doable. It's not going to really bother you in terms of lip sync. 33 milliseconds for the Boom Plus is very, very good. So they both got an app. They both can use EQ. I will do an EQ on the Stormbox Blast at some point when I've got time to fiddle with it. I have to say, it's not a speaker that the measurements can show you lots of it. It's quite V-shaped. It's got a big dip, 5.5 K. It's got issues, but listening to it, and listening is what matters. Nothing really hits you as a major. Yes, it's slightly dark because of those dips. We can certainly tweak it, but it doesn't jump out at you like the Boom Plus does in Soundcore signature mode as being off, not quite right. It needs tweaking. So where does that leave us? I know where it leaves us. It leaves you shouting at me, and we just want to hear it against the Boombox 2, and then the Boombox 3. Well, we're going to get to that, but we have to get this one out of the way because these are the two that are priced within reason. Everything's expensive, but compared to the JBL Boombox 2 and 3 when it comes, they're very, very cheap. Looks like the Boom Plus is a bit cheaper than the Blast, and there are big differences between these speakers. I don't think you should be thinking of these as, should I get the Blast or should I get the Boom Plus? They're doing different things. They're doing it in different ways. Two of those will still weigh less than one of that, but it depends where the pricing ends up on that. Given that the Blast is out now, that may force down the price on the Boom Plus. If you're a self-declared audiophile, if you just like listening to music and you like a neutral sound and it's not about partying, you're going to buy the Blast, but you still may not be the speaker for you because it's like a party speaker, but for people who still like to listen to multi-genres and like their music and listen for little things in the music. You can still do that with the Stormbox Blast, but I don't think that's really what it's all about. I have to say, I personally enjoyed listening to music, and for neither reason than I'm listening to the music. And with XBass on, yes, it's quite overpowering at those louder volumes, but there was never a point when I wanted to turn it off because I missed the deep bass. If it was only a deep bass extension, it would have been great. But the fact that it's boosted not just the bass, the deep bass, but everywhere else, so it's over-egged it a bit. So yes, I would have preferred something in between XBass on and XBass off, but hey, they want to differentiate between the two and they have to give you a reason to do that. So I still prefer it, but yes, it is a bit boosted. Yes, you may not like that. It's something to bear in mind, but I just want to emphasize, I'm not going to say one speaker is better than the other. They do different things. They do different jobs. However, I think this is more of an all-rounder for all of those jobs. Well, that's just going to be a party speaker for most people, in my personal opinion, my honest personal opinion. And I hope to see you, and I'm sure you'll be there when we deliver the JBL Boombox, a killer. Well, it'll kill the price if nothing else. Somebody has got to take on JBL and their prices, and this could be the speaker to do it. It's certainly got the deep bass. Yes, it weighs, I think, nearly as much as the JBL Boombox anyway. But we'll go over those specs at another time. I wanted to get this speaker. This is the problem. I've been rushing these last few videos because there's so much interest and so many people are going, as my channel, lovely, getting bigger and getting so many, all these voices in my head, and I sleep at the night. Oh, he said this one and he said that one. What am I going to do? And I've kind of felt under pressure. So normally I would like to spend longer with the speaker before I review it, really get to know it and stuff like that, and a bit more of a burn-in, whatever. But I don't think we've gone far wrong, even if I had spent more time with them. That's certainly a nice listen outside of a party, but that's only a nice listen for me, in my opinion, at a party. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you in my next video.
I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't no project wife, got my logic right, cause I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. I ain't about that. I ain't about that life.